Welcome to the complete course for the AZ900, also known as the Azure Fundamentals. Since this is the first video, allow me to introduce the course. This course aims to be a complete resource for the AZ900, including everything you need to pass the exam, all 100% free. These videos will be structured by the day and will typically end with practice quizzes that you'd see on the exam. I will cover all the foundational knowledge at the beginning of the course, so you don't need any prior knowledge of the cloud to start. The first few days, we'll be covering the fundamentals of cloud and how it works. This knowledge will be the foundation that the rest of the course builds on. Today's lesson plans to achieve the following. 1. Define cloud computing. 2. Compare cloud pricing models. 3. Describe the consumption-based model. And then lastly, define cloud models, including public, private, and hybrid. Okay, so let's get started. So, what is the cloud? Microsoft refers to the cloud simply as the delivering of computing services like servers, storage, databases, networking, software, analytics, and intelligence over the internet. If you didn't understand that before, you probably still don't after reading that. Let's look further. To understand what the cloud is, let's first look at what it replaced. Before cloud, there was and still is something called on-prem, short for on-premises. Let's say you owned a company and wanted to host a website or an application on a large scale. You would first have to buy a physical server rack to run the app and provide accounts for your staff members. You would also likely need a database in order to store and track customer information. You would also need a router to reach the internet, and likely even a network switch to segment traffic and allow infrastructure to connect to each other. Essentially, you would need a bunch of hardware to run this app and maintain it. On top of it all, the hardware would need to be located in a secure, air-conditioned room to keep everything in, and you were responsible for not only the electricity, but the cabling, the software updates, the patching, and even the eventual outages. This requires a large upfront investment for the hardware and a handful of IT experts to manage said hardware. With cloud computing, all this can become digitalized and controlled through a website. Instead of purchasing all the hardware up front, you would instead rent it from a provider like Azure, and you would pay for how much you use. Now, to solidify this understanding, we can use an analogy. Imagine if you were looking to power your home. Essentially, you'd have two options. You could purchase a generator and buy the gas or fuel needed to run it, or you pay for a utility company to power your home. You could also purchase solar panels, which would compare similar to the generator. The generator or solar panel would be comparable to the on-prem method of IT infrastructure. You would have to buy the equipment up front and set it up to work with your home. To get it working, it may require you to understand the engineering or science behind electricity. If that's something you're not interested in, you could go in a cloud direction and have the utility company provide you with electricity to your home. With this model, you would only be charged for the electricity that you consume. The provider's infrastructure is already in place. They would just need to connect a cable to your home. If something were to break, such as a power cable in your neighborhood, or an issue at a local power station, then it would be the provider's responsibility to come out and fix it. So now we have that in mind. There's a cloud way of doing business and an on-prem way of doing business. For the exam, you will also need to know the difference between two financial models. These would be Capital Expenditure and Operational Expenditure. On the test, you may also see them as their shorter names, such as CapEx and OpEx. In this course, I'll just refer to them as their short names. CapEx is money spent upfront on physical assets, such as servers, storage, and networking equipment. This is the physical hardware you would need to buy in order to run a business. If you've ever taken an economics class, you would know that capital is taught as a physical item that's used to produce goods and services. When we purchase physical IT equipment to run our company, we are purchasing capital. If you owned, let's say, a mining business, then a pickaxe would be considered capital. This type of spending, where we're purchasing hardware to run our business, would be classified as CapEx. This would typically include a large upfront investment for a physical asset that you own. Additionally, this asset would depreciate over time. On the other hand, OpEx is the ongoing day-to-day cost of running a business, like your electricity bill or your cloud services bill. With Azure, you're not buying the server, but instead you're paying a recurring fee to use it as a service. When we go to purchase a server, instead of paying outright for the physical computer and hardware, we're instead paying for the uptime. Instead of shelling out tons of cash for a storage device, we can instead pay for the terabytes that we take up. To relate this to business, things like a light bill, a heating bill, internet bill, or even rent would be considered operational expenses. The key takeaway is that shifting from an on-prem environment to a cloud environment means a shift from CapEx to OpEx. What's appealing about OpEx is that it allows for more financial flexibility and makes it easier to experiment workflows without having to buy expensive hardware. So, how does this OpEx model work in practice? It uses what's called consumption-based pricing. This is a core concept for the exam. In this model, you are only billed for the resources you actually use. If a resource isn't being used, you generally aren't being charged for it, which helps eliminate wasted resources. Now, to expand on the consumption-based model, here's how that would look in practice. With a virtual machine, you would just pay for the up that it's running. Typically, this starts at something like 11 cents an hour. If you stop or deactivate a virtual machine, the billing for the charges stops instantly. You don't pay for a server that's just sitting idle. With Azure Storage, you're typically billed based on the amount of data you store, measured in gigabytes or terabytes per month. If you store 100 gigabytes and then delete 20 of them, your bill automatically goes down. Then there's something called Azure Functions, which is essentially serverless code. You're billed based on the number of times your code is executed and for how long. If your code isn't running, your cost could virtually be zero. It's important to understand that this consumption-based model is a definition of OpEx, not CapEx. You're paying for a service as you use it, which is fundamentally different from CapEx, where you purchase and own a physical asset up front. A quick note that might be worth mentioning, some Azure services, like Azure Reservations, let you pay up front for a 1 or 3 year term to get a discount. You might think this is CapEx, but it is actually OpEx. The key difference is ownership. With CapEx, again, you own a physical asset. With an Azure reservation, you're prepaying for a service. You never actually own the physical server that you're paying for. So to sum it up, CapEx, you're paying for physical hardware. OpEx, you're paying recurring or monthly fees for a service. Moving on the exam, you may also get 1 or 2 questions that involve something called Economies of Scale. What this means is that cloud providers like Microsoft buy their hardware in enormous volumes and allows them to secure the best bulk discounts. This allows them to get hardware at a much lower cost than any single company could. They also design hyper-efficient data centers and negotiate for lower prices on power and cooling. So essentially, these data centers and the hardware that goes in them is bought at a bulk discount, therefore allowing them to pass the cost savings onto the customer. I'm not sure exactly why this is pertinent to cloud, but if you see economies of scale on the exam, just know that Microsoft has so much money that they're able to buy all their hardware and the data centers at a bulk discount and then pass the savings on to the customer. Okay, for our last topic, we need to talk about public, private, and hybrid cloud models. Essentially, these are 3 different ways to categorize cloud, and the deciding factors over these are whether or not a company has total control over the hardware and whether or not the hardware is shared with other companies. In a public cloud, the IT infrastructure is physically owned and maintained by a third-party company. The hardware that your data runs on is also used by other companies, or what Azure likes to call tenants. This doesn't mean that other tenants can access your company's data. It just means that the hardware running on your virtual machine is also most likely being used to run a virtual machine for a different company. A classic way of thinking about this is through an apartment building. Now, if you're a tenant in an apartment building, that means you're renting an apartment, so you get the space, but the infrastructure is shared between apartments. Infrastructure in this case would be the water, the electric, and the plumbing. It's important to note that you don't own this infrastructure either. Like, for example, you don't own your dishwasher. The other side of that means that you have no maintenance responsibilities. So because you're renting the dishwasher and you don't own it, you don't have to perform maintenance on it. So in a public cloud, the provider is responsible for owning and managing all the hardware, software, and supporting infrastructure. Again, this means that the customer has no maintenance responsibilities. In a private cloud, the infrastructure and computing resources are both owned and used by a single organization. This can be something as simple as an on-prem setup, where the servers, databases, and networking equipment all exist within a climate-controlled room under the direct supervision of the IT department. An on-prem environment can very well be considered a private cloud. It doesn't have to be something hosted online. The main thing is that the hardware is under direct control of the organization, and no other organization is running resources on that said hardware. That's what defines a private cloud. Now, what may trick you up is that private cloud can also be hosted by a third-party company. Again, the main deciding factor is that the hardware infrastructure is solely dedicated to that company, hosted on a private network where no other company can touch it. A real-world example is through Azure's dedicated host service. Normally, when you purchase a virtual machine on that service, it's being ran on a machine that's hosting several, if not dozens of other virtual machines. Same goes with something like functions, where you run serverless code. With a dedicated host service, you pay a little more to rent an entire physical server in an Azure data center and guarantee that no other Azure customers' workloads will run on that specific hardware. That in itself is a form of private cloud. The main reason an organization would choose a private cloud is for the high level of control and security it provides. Because the hardware and software are dedicated to a single organization, the environment can be customized to meet specific IT requirements that a shared public cloud might not accommodate. This makes it the necessary model for organizations that handle business-critical operations or sensitive data, or those that operate under strict regulatory and compliance rules that require direct oversight of the environment. A hybrid cloud is the easiest one to explain and is also the most common cloud model in today's landscape. As you would assume, a hybrid model is one that combines a private model with a public cloud, allowing data and applications to be shared between them. In my day job working for an IT department, part of our storage solution includes OneDrive, which is a cloud-based file storage. Files on our computer are backed up to Microsoft's data centers and can be accessed online. However, we also have a network-attached storage, or what's called an NAS. The NAS is located within a secure mainframe room that can only be directly accessed by IT personnel. It provides us with network drives to store files on, but they'll only work if we are directly connected to the company's network. There are no other connections to any other companies from our network drive. As you can see, OneDrive would be considered a public cloud, while our NASs would be considered private cloud. That would make our storage solution a hybrid cloud because we're using a bit of both. Before we move on to the quiz, let's quickly summarize what we covered. First, we define cloud computing as the delivery of computing services over the internet, which allows you to rent resources instead of owning them. This leads to a major financial shift, which moves it from a capital expenditure model, spending upfront money for physical hardware, to an operational expenditure model, where you pay for services as you go. We saw how this OpEx model is put into practice through the consumption-based model, which means you're only billed for the resources you actually use. We also explained how cloud providers can offer these services at a lower cost through economies of scale, which is essentially another word for a big bulk discount. Finally, we reviewed the three main cloud deployment models you can choose from: the public cloud with its shared infrastructure, the private cloud, which offers exclusive resources for a single organization, and the hybrid cloud, which is a mix of both. Okay, now let's move on to the quiz. Question 1. A company decides to migrate from its on-premises data center to the cloud. They sell their physical servers and now pay a monthly bill to a cloud provider based on the resources they use. What financial shift does this represent? A, from an OpEx to a CapEx model. B, from a CapEx to an OpEx model. C, a purely CapEx model. Or D, a purely fixed cost model. Pause the video to think about your answer. Okay, the answer is B. Firstly, A is incorrect. The company is moving away from upfront hardware costs, not towards them. C is also incorrect. A purely CapEx model involves owning physical assets, which the company has just sold. And lastly, D is incorrect. The consumption-based nature of the cloud means costs are variable, not fixed. B is correct because selling physical infrastructure and moving to a pay-as-you-go service is a fundamental financial shift offered by the cloud. The physical infrastructure would be considered capital expenditure, and the pay-as-you-go model would be considered operational expenditure. Question 2. A financial institution must keep all its customer data on hardware that is for its exclusive use to meet strict regulatory requirements. Which cloud deployment model should they use? A, public cloud. B, hybrid cloud. C, private cloud, or D, community cloud? Pause the video to think about your answer. The answer is C, private cloud. A is firstly incorrect. A public cloud uses shared infrastructure, which violates the requirement for exclusive use. B is also incorrect. While a hybrid cloud includes a private component, this scenario requires all data to be on exclusive hardware, making a pure private cloud the direct answer. And then lastly, D is not a primary cloud model discussed in this lesson or on the exam. C is correct. As we discussed, a private cloud consists of computing resources used exclusively by a single organization and is often used by financial institutions with strict compliance needs. Question 3. A developer creates a virtual machine in Azure and runs it for 8 hours to perform a task. After the task is complete, they deallocate the VM and are no longer charged for compute time. Which answer refers to how the developer is charged? A. Economies of scale. B. Capital expenditure. C. The consumption-based model. Or D. The public cloud model. Pause the video to think about your answer. The answer is C. The consumption-based model. Firstly, A is incorrect. Economies of scale explains why the cloud is cheaper, not how it is billed. B is also incorrect. CapEx involves buying physical hardware, not paying for usage. D is also incorrect. While this action likely takes place in the public cloud, the specific principle being demonstrated is the billing model. All of these answers were things we discussed in the video, but the purpose of this question was to build your association between consumption-based model and the pay-as-you-go service of Azure. Thank you for watching. That's all for this video. In the next lecture, we will look at the benefits of cloud. If you want to show your support, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment.